involvement.
Besides the legal observers, how can students get involved more with the National Lawyers Guild?
I think one thing to do is just, for folks that are on Facebook, we have the local Twin Cities chapter has a Facebook page that has, events and activities and notices on there. I mean, to follow that or to go check out the website. The other thing that the Lawyers Guild does, which some people have been kind of gearing up for, is like, for example, if and when something starts actually happening with the pipeline, there will probably be some protests around that.
I'm sure Hannah will be at the front line of that. There will
probably be some arrests around that. And so then, the Lawyers Guild kind of helps coordinate volunteer attorneys or sometimes paid attorneys to help with those folks that have been arrested from those protests. That's another way to get involved, is if people have interest in, in environmental stuff, especially related to the building or non-building of those pipelines.
Would you say kind of the biggest portion of the work the National Lawyers Guild does is work on the environmental or social issues? Or is it broader than that?
I think it's broader than that. I think it depends on kind of, different regions of the country have different issues going on, and I know that there's Lawyers Guild folks that are involved in prisoners' rights issues and, environmental issues and police violence issues and, a variety of things. It just kind of, I think the Lawyers Guild is pretty flexible in trying to it sort of depends on what the folks in that area that are involved are interested in doing. And it also depends on what's going on in that location.
So I have a question, but I was recently told by someone who was visiting the career counseling office at the UMN, and he was told that he had a lot of human rights work on his resume, but if he wanted to get a job with a firm or with the government ever, he needed to have something to balance that out because he wouldn't get hired if it was all too sort of leftist, I guess. And he said he was told even like defense work would be too much if you were trying to get a job with the government. So I just was wondering, is that true in your experience, and what would you say to combat that?
I don't know. I don't know. I guess I would stay away from any kind of blanket statements about, that there are certain things that are going to be resume killers, or that there are certain things that are going to be, if you have it on there, you're going to just, have multiple offers.
Yeah.
I think it all depends on, who the hiring firm or the, agency or whatever is, and sort of your qualifications in general, and I think it always helps to have balance. I mean, it doesn't have to be balance in terms of, showing that you've been on both sides of an issue, but that you have, that you when I was in law school, it got talked about a lot that what we were learning wasn't really so much subject material. It was more to think like a lawyer. Yeah. And, so the ability to be able to kind of see things from very many different angles and not just kind of have tunnel vision. I would think that's what a lot of employers are looking for is critical thinking stuff, as well as, whatever, if it's a tax firm, then you probably should know some tax stuff, but
yeah.
But it isn't all just one thing,
I think we're going to take a short break and then come back and talk to Helene. We're going to talk about Beyond the Vote and the Minnesota by Minnesota 2019 conference that's going to be coming up.
Thank you for listening to the Cold Call Lawcast, the Before we begin, please visit us on social media at Cold Call Lawcast with 3 L's. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Tell us what you think of our podcast or ask us a question.
Welcome back to Cold Call Lawcast. We're talking with Helene, and we wanted to bring up an event that you're going to be speaking at, Minnesota by Minnesota 2019, Beyond the Vote, and it will be held Sunday, February 24th at the Harding High School in St. Paul. Kind of in your own words, what is this event about, and why is it important to Minnesota?
Well, this is actually the second year for this event, and my understanding is that the way this event came about was that after the 2016 election, there were a lot of people that suddenly became activists that weren't necessarily activists in the past. And part of that was demonstrated by the fact that in the January 2017, right after the election, Women's March in Minnesota, we had 105,000 people at the state capitol, which is a lot of people, on a cold January day. And a lot of those folks, both women and men who were there and who weren't there, wanted to do more than just show up and protest. They wanted to, what can I do, And so the Min by Min conference came about as a way to have a number of different workshops where people could learn different skills, or learn about different organizations, activist organizations that are out there. Everything from just a wide spectrum of everything from the National Lawyers Guild to the Muslim Women's Activist Group to the Jewish Women's Activist Group, to folks that are doing work with getting out the vote, folks that are doing work with, just all kinds of, with letter writing or pushing for certain legislation, whatever. But a lot of people think that, well, I've never done that. I don't know how to do that. How would I call my legislator? How would I contact them? How would I go to a lobby day? That kind of stuff. And so there was this one-day event last year, which similar to what will be happening Sunday, where there were just a lot of opportunities for people to learn a lot of skills of various sorts about how to get more involved and how to feel more empowered, to feel like they had a voice in speaking up.
I also saw that Black Lives Matter will also be there. So have they really been spearheading their organization at that event as well?
That event has been really kind of a great show of how just a whole bunch of different organizations can work together, and so I don't know if any Black Lives Matter or any other group has really been kind of spearheading things. I mean, it's like everybody's been spearheading things. There's probably 20, 30, 40 organizations that will be represented there, who have all been kind of working on stuff. And it's a way for them to kind of showcase, like, hey, this is what we're doing. If you want to get involved, here's how you can do it. As you saw from looking at the website, there's just a lot of different topics that are being covered, everything from, money and politics to prisoners' rights stuff, to hate crimes, to, how to be a legal observer, et cetera, how to work together with different groups, how to lobby your legislator, how to organize people in your neighborhood to do stuff, whatever. I mean, it's just a lot of different groups, and I'm not downplaying any of those groups or upplaying any of those groups. I think it's just been a really great show of how groups can really work together.
Right. And you talked a little bit about that civic engagement and people becoming involved, after the election. in 2016. Why is it so important for people to become civically engaged, especially at this time?
Because there's a lot of stuff going on that some of us are really unhappy about, is one answer to that. Because I think that's how things get done. I mean, is that, I've heard this often enough that I've started to believe it, that, for example, with elected officials, that for every one call they get, they know that represents 100 people, and so the more people, whatever your issue is, the more people that actually start holding those elected officials accountable, not just when they're trying to, sell you their bill of goods right before the election about how great they are, but the rest of the time, just, put their feet to the fire and say, okay, you said you're going to do something about affordable childcare. What's the bill you're working on? That's about that, or whatever the issue is. I think if we all step up a little, a lot gets done, and so many people feel disempowered. Like, well, my little voice isn't going to mean anything, but it really does. And if we work together, within whatever our groups are, and then work with other groups, whatever those are, that's a really powerful voice.
I guess, what do you say to those people that are kind of on the fence about being civically engaged when, they say, I have a job, I have a family, how am I going to, what do you say to those people where they aren't as they want to be civically engaged, but their personal lives are just taking up too much of their time?
I think we all, we put our time and energy into what's important to us. It's not what we say, it's what our feet do. It's kind of like, when I was working at the big corporation in the past, we would get 2 volunteer days a year, paid volunteer days. And as long as it was for a volunteer organization, you could pretty much do anything. You could go volunteer at your kid's school. You could, go down to your local library. You could do, pretty much anything. And when people would say to me, well, gosh, what would I even use those days for? I would always think, like, if there's not something that you care about, it may be totally different than something I would care about. But if there's not something you care enough about to use 2 available paid days to volunteer, then maybe we got a bigger problem. And I think it's just, what I see is that I see a lot of like with the Women's March folks, I see a lot of women with spouses and kids at home that manage to find the time to do the stuff that matters to them. And that can be in a variety of ways. It can be by setting up spreadsheets, or it can be, it doesn't always have to be something where you show up for hours on end, or go to boring meetings where people just talk about doing stuff but don't really do stuff. There's a lot of different ways that people can plug in, and I think if we can get in the habit of doing that, of making that time, or of just saying, well, I care about reading, I care about literacy, so I'm going to figure out a way to plug into that somehow, or I care about voter rights, so I'm going to figure out how to encourage people to vote, or whatever our brand of activism is, and then just do that. I think the thing is to find that balance between having having a sane personal life, to where you see your family every once in a while and, have dinner together and stuff like that, and still be able to do that other stuff. But I think that's what makes life interesting,
Yeah.
And it gets stuff done. If we all pitch in a little, stuff gets done.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think it's good to know, like with people in our careers and stuff and going through law school, this has all been a good trial experience and learning experience of how to manage time. Now, if you look at, at least Mitch and I, we work full time and make time for all the extracurriculars, and Mitch has a family and a wife, and I have a wife and things like that. And it's trying to find the moments in the day It could just be 5 minutes